think of the name seed corn maggot, well, I'm a problem in corn. I can assure you it's not only a problem in corn. I lost an acre of cantaloupe 3 years ago. I'd say 90% of the field I lost in the first week of transplant. I think what you're looking at here in the lower right-hand image is it's a small transplant that's been pulled out of the ground, then cut the stem lengthwise, and you open it up, and that year I found as many as 6 or 7 in about 2 inches worth of stem. And they're just devouring the inside of that stem. Now, the following week, temperatures have warmed up. Unfortunately, I think ahead, so I'll seed double of what I need in a given season. So I have enough extra cantaloupe plants back in the same field because it was warmer and all the eggs are already hatched. That 1 week difference. We had some unseasonably cool weather, and that 1 week. So timing of when you plant things can make a difference in terms of dealing with pest problem. Let's talk about squash bugs. Looking at the next page. So squash bugs are an example where you have incomplete or simple metamorphosis. The immature insects, I don't know if you can make it out in the light right now, but there's several emerging from eggs clustered under that leaf there. And then as you move on, in the upper right-hand portion, you see squash bugs that start to develop and grow further. And you notice they look kind of whitish in that upper right-hand image. Everybody see that? And so that white appearance is actually caused by wax. They have a waxy layer on them. What do you think about wax in water? Repels. So they've evolved to have a very good protection against pesticide when they're in that stage of development. It's very, very difficult to kill squash bugs because you can't get pesticide to penetrate and get it into the canopy. And so squash bugs do tend to be one of the more difficult pests to manage. I think actually the adult or newly hatched instar is the best way to manage it. And you say, okay, well, I just know on June 1st that they're going to be at the first stage. No, that's where scouting comes in. Because seasonally, weather is different every year. And so one year it may be June 1st, another year it may be May 15th. It just depends on the type of year we've had. And oftentimes it can depend on the type of winter we've had. If there's any benefit, I don't really enjoy these brutally cold winters we've had the last 2 years. If there's anything positive from a vegetable grower perspective, the cold weather can help reduce some of the pest insects that are trying to overwinter in this climate. Now, the next 2 images on the bottom of that page are examples of 2-spotted spider mite. In the lower left, what you're seeing is watermelon planting, and you can see the leaves there. And if you're looking closely, you can see white spots in between the veins on the leaves. And so those are actually white spots caused by the feeding of 2-spotted spider mites. And so they started as individual pinpricks, and it looks just like a little tiny spot. But so much feeding has been going on, they just start to coalesce together. So they keep feeding in each individual spot, piercing individual cells on that leaf on the bottom side. And as they go from one to the next, they start to coalesce, and then it looks like big yellow spots, when actually it's a conglomeration of multiple feeding sites. So the 2-spotted spider mite, what you're looking at in the lower right-hand image, is the underside of the leaf. And so maybe that's one thing I want to take a moment to touch on, whether it be for disease or whether it be for insect pests. Think about the plant architecture, and so many times, so often we as humans think about things only from our perspective. But the way I was trained, and the way I look at things in the plant world is you have to get into the shoes of the insect, and you have to get into the shoes of the fungus or the plant itself, and think about how they would think and how they would operate. So if this was the soil right here, we had a tomato plant growing this tall. Think about the architecture. You say, well, it's just a tomato plant. Well, there's actually microclimates within that 3 or 4 feet. You've got certain places where some insects, like broadmites like to feed at the top of the plants because they're so small and their mouth parts are so small. The new growth that's coming out is the most tender, and that's where they're most easily able to feed. Now, there are other insects, oftentimes you'll find aphids on the lower portion of the plant. It's a little bit shadier, maybe a little bit cooler, and you say, well, what's the difference in temperature from there to there? Well, when you're this big, there's a pretty big difference in temperature variation just within those 3 feet. So you have to think about microenvironments. And then as I'm talking about different places on the plant, talk about, are you on the top side of the leaf or are you on the underside? Many of our arthropod tests, many of our insects are going to be on the underside. So if you're using a contact insecticide, is it good enough just to spray it over the top? No. Like I said earlier, with a contact insecticide, it's like having a gun. You know, I can shoot at somebody all I want, but if I don't hit them with the bullet, they're not going to die. It's the same thing with the insecticide. You just think you spray over the top. So oftentimes, whether it's commercial or for a home gardener, you're using a hand pump sprayer, a backpack sprayer, or you're using a large tractor-driven sprayer. So with a tractor-driven sprayer, you can't really get under there and manipulate where the nozzles are. So how do we manipulate that? With pressure. So when I spray with a tractor-driven sprayer, I'm looking somewhere between 200 and 300 PSI. And I can really put the pressure down and get that pesticide to roll back up onto the leaf. Now, from a gardener's perspective, you're not going to have a high pressure system. Most likely the highest pressure you're going to get out of the backpack sprayer is about 40 PSI. So like I said earlier, you can't just spray it over the top. So it becomes a little more time consuming, but I actually turn that nozzle upside down, that wand upside down, I'm sticking it into the plant, trying to spray on the bottom side of the leaf when I'm trying to spray the insecticide. You've got to get good contact. So on the next page, what you actually can see is a blown up, a zoomed in shot of a two-spotted spider mite. So two-spotted spider mite is in the same family as spiders, hence it has 8 legs as opposed to 6 like insects. Mites are not insects. They are arthropods, but they're not insects, they're arachnids. Hence the name spider mite. The reason why they're called spider mites is because they actually cause weather. And has anybody ever seen spider mites in their own crops, whether it be ornamental, tree fruit, vegetable crops? Spider mites are one of many, but one that really cause problems in just about anything. Spider mites will affect roses. Spider mites can affect trees. Spider mites can affect vegetable crops, ornamental crops. If you're seeing a lot of weather, and that's the first instance you're seeing of the spider mites, you've got a serious problem. And you're more than likely not going to be able to turn that ship around, so to speak. So again, why scouting is important and looking early on. If you don't have one, I would invest in a hand lens. You can pick them up for probably $10. It's just a small lens about that big. Usually has a 10x or 20x power, and you use that to the other side of leaves and you're trying to see. Now, I've been doing this a while, I'm still young enough that my eyes are good, I can see spider mites with my naked eye, I don't use a hand lens. But that's because I know what I'm looking for. If you've never seen one before, it's going to take you a while to get used to that, but once you figure out, you learn what it is, you should be able to recognize it on the underside of the leaf. So in terms of managing two-spotted spider mites, there's chemical application, but scouting is really the big part to know when they come in. And so, I was talking about microclimates earlier and thinking, well, most people that I talk with, farmers or whoever, when we think about spider mites, they like hot, dry weather. Well, that's hot, dry weather for us. Where they hang out is on the underside of the leaf, under the midrib. And in that little area there next to the midrib, it's about 98% relative humidity. So it's not dry by any stretch. But that's based on what we think of when conditions are good for them, it's hot, dry weather. So one crop that I work a lot with is watermelon and cantaloupe. I usually know by about the second or third week of July that I make sure I've got what I need to spray for mites because there's a good chance they're going to be present. But that's again in commercial fields. But you see spider mites ubiquitous in the environment. You see them in all different crops. I see them in my mom's garden all the time. Do any of you like to have some tropical plants in large containers and bring them in your home for the winter time? If any of you do that, like my mother does, you're bringing in the aphids, you're bringing in the thrips, you're bringing in the whiteflies, you're bringing in the spider mites, and you're allowing them to bridge the gap so they're there for the next year.
Does these things lay a little yellow egg on the bottom of the plant?
On the leaf,
On the leaf?
but it's very, very small.
Yeah, I don't understand. Is that what it is?
Without actually seeing what you're seeing, I can't say with 100% certain. I mean, they're very, very small. Very, very small. If you were able to see that egg, you should have seen those mites running around on the leaf too. There's all sorts of different eggs that you see in various sizes from different types of insects. So without seeing what you're referring to, it's hard to say that absolutely was a two-spotted spider mite. Another common problem is European corn borer. And oftentimes these insects have a common name associated with the crop that they're most prevalent in, the one they were first discovered in. But what you see there is European corn borer in the stem of the pepper. So they have broader host ranges than what we may think. Trying to detect that, scouting again. So spend time with your crops, look on the plants, look on the leaves, look at different parts of the plant. I know it can be time consuming, but if you really want to try to maximize productivity of your garden, you really want to try to avoid these things. And it really goes with anything. Let's be proactive instead of reactive. When you're reactive, everybody understand that? So by being proactive, you're trying to look ahead, trying to avoid and prevent the problem. Reactive, you can wait until the problem smacks you in the face and say, oh God, I gotta do something about this quick. Now occasionally you can catch up and you'll be okay, but a lot of times you're pretty much down and taking my breaks. So we've touched on insect threshold already. Looking in the lower right, you actually see a corn earworm moth, so that's what we were collecting in traps. And I know they do that here in Kentucky as well. If you go to the next page, if you see that wire cone basket, that's the type of trap that's utilized. If you've ever seen those out in Mexico, that's what those traps are there for. They're trying to catch moths. And those traps are monitored on a daily basis to determine whether or not there's enough moths to dictate a treatment. Something else that's pretty simple and easy that a home gardener could do is get yellow sticky cards. You can buy them from different horticultural supply places. They also make blue sticky cards. And so I like yellow and blue both because they attract different insects. Yellow often attracts whiteflies and aphids. The blue will often attract thrips. And what those cards are, if you look at that card closely enough, it actually has grid lines on it. Anybody think of why it would have grid lines on it? Help you count. You're counting to see how many thrips are there, which also means, but oftentimes you attract other stuff. You get trash insects, like you'll get a fly that's attracted to it. Well, so part of that means you have to start learning what's good, what's bad, what matters at all. A lot of times you get just arbitrary flying insects that fly by and get stuck to it. It's really not a problem at all. So don't panic for everything that gets stuck to that card. Let's touch on biological control for a moment. So looking in the lower left, we have a tobacco or tomato hornworm. So that looks kind of funny. That doesn't look like it. For those of you that have seen a tobacco hornworm, you say, well, it looks kind of odd. It's all that white stuff. Those white things are actually pupa. So there's been an organism that's laid the eggs in there. The larvae are developing inside the caterpillar, and then they form that little white pupa, and then they'll fly out and fly away to infect another one. Now, maybe that was a poor example of biocontrol. The reason I say this is I use that one because many people have seen it. I've seen it in real life. Many people see that as an example. The reason why I say that's not a good example of biological control is they're so clever, the parasitoid that's laying the eggs in there, that it doesn't kill the hornworm. The hornworm continues to feed, so it gets nutrients. So when the hornworm gets nutrients, that means that the eggs and the offspring of those eggs get nutrients as well. So it actually continues feeding, and so it doesn't do you any good from a practical perspective. But I use that one again because many people have seen those. I mean, I've seen those in the state of Kentucky in greenhouses and open field. Now, if you move to the lower right, we have an example of broadmite. Now, broadmite I mentioned earlier, it's like a spider mite, except it doesn't actually spin webbing. And remember, I said it likes to feed in the top part of the plant. So if you're looking for broad mites at the bottom of the plant, you're probably not going to find them because the foliage is too tough and not tender enough for their mouth parts to pierce into that tissue. And so if you look in the image of the actual pepper fruit, so not only can they feed on the leaves, but they can feed on the pepper fruit themselves when they're young and small and starting to slowly develop. And as that fruit expands, even if feeding is stopped, you see the pepper on the right is distorted, small, and has brown demarcations all over it. This is a very appetizing bell pepper. It's not one that I would want to eat. So it shows you how they can impact it. Broad mites are so small that I do use a hand lens for broad mites. I use 20 it's too small for this too. I can usually spot the damage and the symptoms of their friends before I could ever spot them. So knowing what the symptoms look like is also very helpful. And on the right-hand side of that, you can see a diagram. You have an adult female, you have a motile nymph, and you see eggs as well. And then you also have an adult male carrying a female nymph. Let's look at some other examples of some pest problems and some beneficial insects. Silverleaf whitefly. Whiteflies are pests that usually live in winter in greenhouses. Can be quite problematic if you do have them, but there are biological ways to manage these. Neoscelius californicus is actually a mite, like two-spotted spider mite, but it doesn't eat plants. It eats other insects and other arthropods. Neoscelius californicus is a predator, and so it usually it's running around looking to feed on nymphs of not whitefly, but actually immature stages of the broad mite or two-spotted spider mite. And looking at this, the reason why I have the silverleaf whitefly there pictured, and you probably can't make it out in the light, but if you look at the legs, if you actually look at the legs of the whitefly, so on the right-hand side is the head, you see some swellings on the legs. Those swellings are actually broad mites. So broad mites have gotten so clever that they hitchhike. They're sporadic. So they're that small. Whitefly is very, very small. When you see a white flash, you can see, you know that's a whitefly. But broad mites are that small that they're actually hitchhiking on the legs of a whitefly. And the Neoscelius californicus is a predatory species which can actually exist naturally in the environment. I've found predatory mites in the environment, or you can purchase them. The last 4 years I worked in greenhouses in Florida. I made no pesticide application. I managed all of my insect pests with beneficial insects. So if you look in that same slide, you see a small bottle. It's about that tall, about that wide, and it has a little cap on it, like a spice bottle would, with little holes all on the top of it. So you unscrew it and you sprinkle them over top of the plant. Now, there's usually 1,000 predatory mice that come in that vial. But they don't just dump 1,000 mice in there and ship it off to you. They actually ship it in bran. And they ship it in bran so the predatory mice have a place to hide from one another because they're also cannibalistic. And so they eat each other. And so they ship it in bran. So when you see the bran, it's really more about hiding from one another. So they don't eat each other. The same predatory mite, Neoscelius californicus, can also be used to manage two-spotted spider mite as well, or will predate on two-spotted spider mites. And actually, if you look in the lower left, you can see the two-spotted spider mite there, and right behind it is Neoscelius californicus trying to puncture and extract the bodily fluids of the spider mite. And then on the right-hand side, you see examples of Phytocelius persimilis. Phytocelius persimilis is the red predatory mite. Looks really more like a true spider. And then to the right of it is a two-spotted spider mite. And then if you look below that, you actually see Phytocelius persimilis climbing on the back of the two-spotted spider mite and shoving its mouth part into the back of the two-spotted spider mite. And one general rule of thumb, just to help you, if you're ever interested or looking into biological control, think about how they move. So imagine that I'm a two-spotted spider mite and I'm standing on a leaf right now. So this floor is a leaf. How far do I have to go to my food source? Nowhere. I just go down, I stick my mouth part into the floor and I start pulling plant juices out of it, right? If I'm a predatory mite, my food source is the intestine. So I have to move out this whole leaf, if you will. This whole floor is a leaf, I have to move it out. So plant feeding mites, like two-spotted spider mite, it moves very slowly. doesn't have to go to bark breaks too. So one rule of thumb, when I teach people about scouting, when I take them out to the open field, I flip that leaf over. If you see something zipping across the bottom really fast, it's a mite, more than likely it's a predatory mite. If you see it moving really, really slowly, it's most likely it's going to be a mite. Moving on to some other biological control mechanisms. So Apis gossypi in the slide in the lower right, in the upper left of that slide, you see two black things coming off the posterior end of that aphid. We call those corticals, and that's the tail end of it. The head is actually down. But there's a couple different types of ways to manage that, aside from chemical means. And Ophidius columnarium is one means of doing that. Ophidius columnarium is a parasitoid wasp. Also, those do exist naturally in the environment. And when most people think of wasp, you think of a nuisance wasp that's going to build a paper nest or something like that. These are very, very small. These are, I would say, at least half the size of a fly, if not smaller. So they're very, very small. But these wasps will actually lay an egg inside an aphid, an adult aphid, and then it will become mummified. And when the egg starts to develop, it'll turn. So if you look in the lower left, you see the aphid there. It actually looks kind of whitish. That's a mummy. And so the egg is developing in there, the larvae is developing in there, and then we'll chew a hole in the posterior end and fly out and complete the life cycle. And so those can also be purchased. Some of those actually do occur naturally in the environment. We do have one dealer out of Louisville that does sell beneficial insects, but if you do have interest, I know at least a couple different sources that do those types of things. I've worked with it for multiple years and been quite effective in using it. Moving on to one of the last examples for biological control, we'll touch on western flower thrips. Flower thrips, as the name would imply, oftentimes they're found in the flower. So if you're looking for thrips, one of the easiest ways to do that is to take a sheet of white paper, just take a sheet of notebook paper, take a clipboard, with a white sheet of paper on it, and you take some of the flowers of your tomato plant or a bell pepper plant, some sort of other plant. You kind of, when you got to break the plant, you kind of bang the plant flower on that paper, and you should be able to see these little slither insects that are moving around on the surface of those thrips, most likely western flower thrips. So those can be problematic from their feeding damage, but they can also be problematic because they vector virus. So remember we talked about virus vectors earlier tonight, like aphids or like the cucumber beetle that actually spread the pathogen. Let's touch on some pesticide safety now. And so whether or not you want to do this organically, conventionally, same things still apply. And that's sometimes a misnomer. Sometimes people think organic means chemical free, and that's not the case at all. It's just organically approved chemicals. There's examples of chemicals which are organically approved, which are highly toxic, like rotenone, which have been linked to Parkinson's disease as well. I'm not here to push you away from growing organically. Don't take it that way. I'm just trying to provide you with the information. Because too often in media it's presented that an organic system had fairies and pixie dust, and there's no pesticide usage, and it's all everything's all gravy basically. And it's not that way. You do have some issues with the organic system, so there are safety concerns as well. So there's some abbreviations which you'll see in pesticide labeling. Again, regardless of organic conventionals, there's three I want you to become familiar with. REI is re-entry interval. So if the re-entry interval on a product is 6 hours, so if I finish spraying at 4 o'clock today, it would be 10 o'clock before I could go into that field. So the re-entry period. Same thing with your garden. PHI is pre-harvest interval. Sometimes the pre-harvest interval on a given product will be 0 days, sometimes it will be 0.1 days, depending on the application method and what product it is you're applying. So the pre-harvest interval means if it's a 7-day pre-harvest interval, I spray today, I gotta wait 7 days before I can safely harvest that fruit and consume that fruit. Or if I was gonna market it the same difference, it would be 7 days or 21 days, whatever the pre-harvest interval is. PPE stands for personal protective equipment. All pesticide labels should include this as well. And based on what the chemistry is will dictate what you need to wear, and they'll be explicit. It will say you need to wear long sleeves, long pants, socks, shoes, goggles, eye protection, respirator, depending on what the product is that you're applying, different things of that nature. So I think chlorothalonil is a pretty common fungicide, and I think the PPE for that is simply long sleeves, long pants, and eye protection and gloves. Where if you're talking about something else, maybe like Agravac, I would probably be in a full Tyvek suit, and I probably wouldn't wear a respirator. Agravac is a very, very effective miticide. I use it myself when I come across these problems. Agravac is also a GABA inhibitor. GABA is short for enzyme complex that not only insects have in their brains, but we as humans also have in our brains. So you don't want to inhibit your GABA. So you need to be careful with any pesticides and medications. So we have examples of some labels here just going on. And so under agricultural use requirements in the lower left, you'll see there's a restricted entry interval is 48 hours. In that example, looking on the next example, talks about personal protective equipment. So every label of pesticide should have that component to it as well. I know it's a lot of fine print, but it's something you really need to be conscious of. The other thing is that labels change regularly, so you need to be aware of that. I've seen commercial growers that haven't been aware of certain things, like endosulfan. Endosulfan is a very effective insecticide for aphids. And I had a commercial grower call me, and he's like, I've got an aphid problem, I want to control it. I see like endosulfan, I've already got some laying around. I'm like, well, no, sir, you can't use endosulfan on the given crop because it's no longer labeled for that crop. They're phasing that product out. Another example is Admire. The active ingredient is imidacloprid. Admire used to be, I think this year is something that you could apply to the foliage of plants as an insecticide to kill certain insects. And you can also water it in as a drench at the beginning of the crop. Well, now, with the vegetable entomologist this last week, we had this question arise, we scoured every label, generic, name brand, for imidacloprid. There no longer is fully